You are using computer audio. Pause? No.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We have my phone here.
So we're recording. Okay, welcome everyone to Real Relationship. A lot of you have not met me face to face. This is a live event right now. We're going to have it recorded as well. Many of you, pretty much all of you, because you're on her mailing list, know Belinda. Belinda is a good friend of mine, along with Regina, my wife. A lot of you know Regina. Raise your hand if you know Regina or have seen some of her stuff. So a lot of you have. So I think some of you might have been curious, to see the husband of Regina. Is he a loner? Is he what kind of guy is he? Well, I'd say we have a pretty good. There's a good story around that, actually. I was writing, this is back in Ohio, and I was just typing. I was writing a book called Spirit Athlete, in which I would kind of channel kind of these spiritual insights as I was on an exercise bike. And I would start writing it down, like the link between exercise and spirituality. And as I was writing this, I just all of a sudden got off my seat, turned around, and physically stood up and said, "Oh, enough is enough. I want a spiritual equal. I'm ready." that was about a month before Regina called me up to be interviewed on her show, Open Minds, on my book, Transforming Economy. And I went there, and we had a dinner beforehand. She does that sometimes with some of her interviewees. And I just wanted to sort of pick her brain about all these different subjects she interviews about. And we had a wonderful conversation. And we had, we kind of had a hug that maybe lingered a little bit more than it should have at the end. There was this true sense of connection. And then actually, believe it or not, Belinda met Regina right on the same day that I had written her back by email to say I had a delightful time meeting you. And Regina was a little bit nervous about it, and she asked Belinda about it. And Belinda said, "Step out of the way. It's just faster than the speed of light. This is going to happen. Nothing you can do about it." and Belinda was correct on that, for sure. And there were some interesting things. You'll have to, if you're very interested about this and other tales, I would recommend Regina has just released a book called Accidentally on Purpose. I don't know how many of you know about it, but it goes into this and other adventures, other metaphysical adventures. It's an extremely entertaining read. And I would recommend that to anyone out there too. My own book, Spiritually Confident Man, has also been recently released, and it's on Amazon if you're curious about some of the stuff that I do. So anyway, let's get going with real relationships. I find relationships to be one of the most intriguing and difficult and rewarding things out there. We just think about it. If you're an individual, oftentimes you are working really hard to integrate vertically the upper mind, higher mind, and your lower self, your subconscious and unconscious self, trying to find a way to get the two of them in relationship with each other through your participation. And many people, heck, there are monks and people who just go off and do it by themselves because everything else is so complicated and that requires so much attention. But think about that. You're integrating this way, and then all of a sudden you're coming to face with people this way, especially male and female polarities and energies. So now we're talking about a really complicated situation in which you're trying to share spirituality in the depths of yourself in the middle of trying to develop and grow and develop your soul. At the same time, you're relating with another person who's going through that same process completely individually, and at the same time trying to relate with each other and be in a supportive relationship with each other. So the first thing I want to come off and say is, it's not easy. It's an extraordinarily challenging to be a human being to begin with, and to be a human being in relationship is even more challenging. But it's also extraordinarily rewarding. And I'm just going to open this up with some questions that have been asked by some of the participants that couldn't make it, tell you a little bit about myself, and so my background, how I come to relationship. I think that story about Regina and I is a good opening story, because really, I mean, I think if I were to encapsulate relationship, it would be a relationship of spiritual equals. Now, equal does not mean same. You know, equal means something very, very different than same. It means that the real uniqueness and distinctness and difference of the two can come together in a wonderful, meaningful, and lovely way. Can be exchanged powerfully and beautifully in ways that enhance each other. And another way I have of saying this is, I want the best of you from the best of me. And that best is not something I project on you. It's not something I want from you like a parent might want for a child, you know, to succeed. It's a friendship that's deeply engaged, it's intimate, it's affectionate, and at the same time, it's also challenging. So these things, so the first thing is, it is one of the most difficult things, a real relationship. It's also one of the most challenging, it's also one of the most rewarding things. And so much of what we're taught out there right now isn't really, in my opinion, very helpful, because there's, you know, just to give you an idea or example, a lot of, say, therapists focus on communication. Then research comes along that says, well, it's not really about communication. It's about goodwill and building up this bank of good feeling and goodwill with another person. So, so that was, you know, and then more research comes up, and then there are tons of three-letter acronyms that say emotionally focused therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. And, you know, people aren't actually methods. And I don't actually use methods with my clients or in my practice. I concentrate on what I call divine genius. Now, divine genius to me is that unique iris print or soul print within you that you are bringing forward into the world. There's nothing else like it in the universe. There's nothing more powerful for you personally. And to me, a real relationship, a good and healthy relationship, is able to help bring that divine genius forward, to help develop it, to help support it. So that's sort of how I look at it. And again, divine genius, what would be a good way to, what did I put this way? It comes from within, but plays out here on earth. So it's as a divine source, but its engagement is here. It's unique. Nobody else has it. And if the world ran in a much more, I guess you would say, supportive way, from schooling, from the moment, maybe even before a child comes out of the womb, we would go ahead and say, what is that child's divine genius? How can we listen? How can we support? How can we bring it out? And how can we allow society and our communities to benefit from that unique wisdom that this being is bringing in from the spiritual realm into this earth, like a channel of energy and so forth. So I think in terms of real relationship, that divine genius and being able to respect and honor and develop it in yourself and want that for another person is extraordinarily important. And again, just a note to everyone here as we're going around, I'm just going to interrupt myself real quick since there's a lot more people jumping on. Go ahead and unmute, or go ahead and mute your background if you can. And also there's a chat button down at the bottom, which will allow a chat window to open up. If you want to type a question, that's fine too. I think we're going to go ahead and try to use a kind of hand raising if we have actual questions. So far, it looks like we have, I don't know, it looks like at least 10 participants now. If it doesn't get too unmanageable, maybe we'll just do that. So, so I'm really interested. I don't want to spend too much time on myself. Belinda suggested I go ahead and give you a little bit of background for myself, but I really want to get into your questions. I can bring a couple questions up that have already been offered. But right now I'm teaching a class called Motivation and Emotion. It's an online class for Northern Arizona University. And what I've found in terms of real relationships, one of the things that I find most pressing is that so many of us are trying to edit our lives into lower and higher, right? We want the higher emotions and feelings, and we want to extirpate and get rid of anger, and we want to get rid of jealousy and all these other kinds of things that are supposedly a lower amount. What I found in terms of the relationship between the two is that these so-called negative or lower emotions are a great signal and teacher to us as human beings on this planet. Remember, as humans, we're trying to integrate the higher and the lower, the inner and the outer, and ultimately men and women, or you and whatever partnership you're with. And one of the best ways to start is to stop the war between your so-called base emotions, right, and your so-called higher emotions, and start getting in a conversation with them. That serves as a model with a conversation between you and another person. Because when another person is losing it, and they're not at their best, shall we say. And sometimes I just envision this as a child. When a child has not had sleep and not had food, they will inevitably melt down. We're better at controlling that as adults, but really we're not that far from that. So it might not be a lack of sleep and food, but it may be just the fact that we got yelled at work, or that things began to pile up, or that some trauma from childhood came up or was triggered in us today. And so one of the first things that I suggest in terms of developing a real relationship is really looking at the real relationship within yourself, between your upper self, as you could say, your lower self, your more subconscious or unconscious self, and to develop a more compassionate, practical relationship where the best part of you, as Thich Nhat Hanh said, holds like a mother holds her child. Those parts of you that seem to be poorly behaved, and asks, I'm here with, it says, first of all, I'm here with you. And then says, secondly, where are you coming from? What are you trying to say? And that actually works with people too, even people that blow up at you. I have an exercise in my class where I say, next time, I say, take a particularly potent problem you have in your relationship with a loved one. And on the next time you're getting into the old dynamics where you're getting irritated or angry, just call it a timeout. I mean, what I call a hard stop, okay? And say, hey, we don't have to go down this road. I'm going to take the time to listen to you, embrace you like a mother would hold her child. I don't tell them to say that, but embrace you, listen to you, and see where you're coming from, where these feelings are coming from. And just that simple act alone has an extraordinary effect. The person, first of all, usually the person's very surprised. They're like, oh. And surprise is always good for the most part. These kinds of pleasant surprises, they work really well psychologically and emotionally. And that person's like, oh, the same dynamic's not applying. Their unconscious programming triggering, going back to childhood, is interrupted. And they're brought by that surprise into a conscious frame of mind. And now they have a person listening to them. And this is true of your own emotions when you're having conversations, trying to hold them. If you say to your emotion, just physically say to your emotion, anger, where are you coming from? I hear you. I'm with you. I'm holding you. What are you trying to say to me? Because most of these lower emotions are wake-up calls for some issue in our life, something we're stretching too much, something we're avoiding, these sorts of things. And so we can actually have some degree of gratitude and appreciation for that. And the same is true with another person. Sometimes even when that person is blowing up in our face, if we have the courage to be present and the courage to say, you know, instead of reacting and going into our own sort of triggered or trauma modes, to say, I hear you. I'm with you. Let's sit down. I want to hear you out. I can't hear you very well if you're yelling at me, but let's sit down, you know, and just tell me what you need to tell me straightforward. Tell me what's bothering you. And that's not easy. That's not easy because let's say they come out with something like, well, I don't like the way you fill in the blank, you know, and you're like, automatically it's already triggering your emotions. And instead say, okay, tell me more about that. Okay, what about it? You know, and again, by allowing that communication, by allowing that emotion to come forward, without trying to challenge the content straight up, you begin to get at the question about why. Why is this coming up? And where is it coming from? So again, that's this is a lot easier when you bring the notion of divine genius into it, because no matter how torqued out somebody is, or sometimes even how unreasonable they are, you can still see within them a desire to do something powerful, important, satisfying, fulfilling, even something that contributes something to the world. But for the most part, one, we aren't really taught how to do this in school, in our business, in church, anywhere. Basically, if you're going to be a good person, you're going to fit this box or that definition. You know, this notion of this creative expression, and more importantly, co-creative expression with yourself, between your higher, your inner, outer, your upper and your down, and with another person is not something that's hard. So if you're struggling with this, take a deep breath and say, you're probably way ahead of the game already if you're with Belinda here. And I'm going to actually throw her question out there. She talked about, what do you do when you're basically a nice and kind person like Belinda is, like Regina is, and you have a person that's not a narcissist. They're generally good at heart, but they are blowing up at you and regularly getting angry or testy, you know? And what Belinda said was they're projecting their negative parent on you, right? And in an odd way, it's kind of a testament to their trust in you. It just doesn't feel good. I mean, they feel enough safety with you to share those sort of unvarnished, kind of uncomplimentary, ugly feelings. But it's not the basis of creating a wonderful, cherished relationship either, you know? So if the person is doing that, they're projecting their negative parent on you, what do? Well, I think you can sort of do what I just kind of led you through in terms of saying, okay, let's sit down. Let's talk about it. Let's see where it's coming from. And see that as an expression of something trying to get out. And just like you with your own emotions, try to do it with them, okay? I did this with my son once, and he was extraordinarily angry and poorly behaved. And actually, kids are great teachers in terms of this, because they don't have so many screens. they're blowing up everything. Usually they're not third order and fifth order removed, right? You know, they don't have all these, veils put up. And he was extraordinarily cranky. He was angry. He was throwing things around. And I said, Phoenix, let's talk about this feeling. I said, are you missing your mom? This was one of her trips. This was back in the Philippines. And this is my ex-wife. She was on one of her longer business trips. I think it was a 3-week one. And anything over 1 week started getting on him. And I said, are you feeling lonely? Or are you feeling lonely for your mom? And he melted. He melted like, and he said, yes. The presenting feeling, the triggering feeling, once I was able not to react to it, either see behind it, which is a little easier as a child, or communicate in such a way as to get behind it, and then to support and honor where it's coming from, helps dissolve that kind of urgency and desperation that's given by being suppressed or closed in. I also saw that one of the best situations of a person doing this, and this is a great clue to another question that we have coming up here, is a guy who was, I saw this in Boston. He was getting out of the car. He was yelling at this other guy, and it looked like he was ready to run and beat him up. Something about this guy had set him off, and he literally had stopped his car, gotten out of his door, and he was ready to come at this person. His friend was in the passenger seat, and I don't know where he got this inspiration from, but he went around to the driver's side where this guy was screaming, and he just put his arms around him in a big old hug. And he was whispering something in his ear. I couldn't tell because I was too far away. And to see this guy going like this, and then just like this, he melted like he was like putty, to the point I think he forgot what he was even mad at. He literally stopped talking. He didn't bring it up again, and he was done. That, I think, is another powerful example of what can happen when we are in real relationship with our emotions. Now, what is real relationship? Real relationship is deep honoring and respecting the divine genius, the original genius of everything. Now, there's a divine genius in you that's kind of your dharma, that you bring out into the world. But there's a divine genius in your little emotion too. And being able to see that, what's it saying, even if it's very uncomfortable to receive. There's a divine genius in another person, even when they're being jerks, okay? Now, of course, there are practical aspects here too. Not everybody is going to be willing to honor that in you or be in a sustainable situation. If a person is a hyper narcissist or they're abusive, you know, at some point you simply just have to say, okay, if you're not willing to be in an honoring relationship with me, I can't have a relationship with you, you know? And that is fine to say as well, because one of the things that empathetic and caring people do all the time is feel an obligation to hand themselves over to somebody. Divine genius in real relationship is not about handing yourself over to someone. It's about creating relationship with someone, and that's a two-way street. Relationship, especially if it's set up with my divine genius communicating with divine genius, really requires that person to make that affirmative aspect of themselves more important than doing something nasty to you or putting you down. And that's where the dividing line becomes. If a person can at least express from themselves, even if it's really, really off, even sometimes if they're making judgments about you and you don't react about it, oftentimes it can provide really good information about where they're coming from. And you can say, okay, stop, I'm gonna listen to you. And you can repeat and say, oh, it seems like this is where you're coming from, and this is concerning you. And it can be, that kind of empathy can be extraordinarily helpful because getting at the sorts of things. And one of the questions that was put forward here was, well, what about people who are simply asleep? And I think this was Maite from Spain. She said, I can't be on this, she's going to get a recording of this. She said, what about people who are asleep? I'm a spiritual person and I'm trying really hard to connect with other people. They're not screaming at me or anything, or even necessarily threatened, but they seem to be completely tuned out. And this is a good practical question too. You want to have a real relationship with a family member, or you want to have a real relationship with someone that you grew up with as a kid. And for some reason, or a child, this is especially true of children in the video age, right? They're just linked into their video and social media, and you're trying to say, let's have an actual conversation. And they're like, nah, you know, okay, yeah, sure. You can do it while I'm playing on my game. My son does that too. So it's not exactly, it's not about your enlightenment as a parent or as a grandparent or whomever, aunt or uncle. And what I find is that you do need, at least what I find for me, is that there, as I establish an environment where something that they really enjoy or interested in comes up, that's not attached to a screen, that I can participate with them in. My son likes scootering, okay? And I'll participate in it with him as well. I'll jump on a spare scooter or a bike, something like that, or sometimes I just watch him. But I'm engaging him on his terms. I'm focusing and listening in such a way as I'm seeing where he's coming from. I'm curious. And this goes for emotions too, to be curious. This little light here sometimes turns off and on. I don't know, it's a little angel speaking. But, and again, if you notice, the things that create real relationship are attention, not being intimidated, overwhelmed, allowing yourself to see through something instead of just at something that's being presented to you, whether it's inside yourself or between you and another person. And I guess from that, I'm looking at, we've already got about 24 minutes. I don't want to go on too much. I'd like to get some of your curious questions and have us really talk about some of the relationship issues that you want to talk about. And, you know, if we have extra time, I share some of my other notes or whatever. But I'd kind of like you to jump in and either type in the chat or raise your hand. I'll go ahead and click on it. You can go ahead and unmute yourselves and you can ask the question live. Anyone there? Well, I can keep going. There are a couple other questions that came up. But yeah, if you're thinking about it, go ahead. Before I go on, how many of you would say you're introverts? Go ahead and raise your hand sort of in the pane there.
Definitely.
Okay. All right, I want to get the introvert's perspective on this. This is yes, I've got Now, I'm saying there was one on the phone here that just said definitely. Who's this? Go ahead.
Rachel in St. Louis.
Rachel in St. Louis. If you don't mind me asking, you said you're an introvert?
Yes.
Okay. What are some of your particular problems as an introvert creating a real relationship or relating at a higher level with someone? What are some of your particular problems or interests?
Well, my wife and I have a couple that we've known for nearly 20 years, and it's really come to my attention recently that there's no real engagement in conversation. There's even with people that we've known for a long time, and then, you know, other people that we meet just in general, there's people just seem so distracted now. There's no real conversation, and it's hurtful when it's people that you've known for so long. Right. It's just a one-sided conversation, and I think what attracted me to this class was just, I'm looking for people that want, we were just saying about genuine attention. Right. You know, really, really asking people questions and wanting to elicit from them what's going on in their lives. And I feel like that's missing. And I don't know how to tease that out of people that I care about and get them to be on board.
Right. Now, when you were trying to model this behavior by asking questions about their inner life, do they just give you kind of throwaway answers? Or is it just one-sided where you might do that to them and they just don't seem to reciprocate?
They don't reciprocate. You know, I invite them to talk about what it is that's going on for them. And, you know, for example, my friend has a really stressful job, and it had gotten to a point where I could see where it was becoming a problem in her marriage. It was certainly becoming a problem as being her friend. And so I tried to ask her, you know, the what if game. What if you had a different job? What if you did something else? Is there anything that interests you outside of what you're doing now? You know, and this would go on for hours, and there was never any reciprocation of, well, now that we've talked about me, what's going on for you, Rachel, or what's going on for you, Marie? It's just kind of this one-sided discussion instead of really engaging her friends that she's known for 20 years. And it's not just this one person. I'm saying, like, this has become a pattern that I'm seeing in other people where they're just not interested in having a two-way conversation.
Right. And there also seems to be the matter, too, of them not really wanting to transform. They're complaining a lot, but it's seeming like not earnestly trying to transform what's going on there. Is that also correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's a big one. And I have to say, and keep on the line, I have to say, there's a couple of things that I've noted here. Both Regina and I have noted this. There's a real fog descending right now. Well, part of it is, I think, has to do with social media and the proliferation of smartphones and so forth. But there is also a kind of uncertainty and transitioning happening right now. And people are not contending with it, with the ambiguity. They're not satisfied with where they are. They're not willing to make these clear strides forward. And when they have caring people like yourselves and friends like yourself to say, let's imagine into a new kind of future, they're like, oh, someone here to listen to me. Hey, you know, it's like social media. Hey, someone's listening to me. I've got another friend who's willing to give their attention and support to me. So part of what I hear in your question, and I don't think it's an easy answer, is how do you create at least a small group community of exchange where people are helping each other go forward, deal with their problems, and maybe begin to build their dreams a little bit? Is that accurate to say?
I would say that. I think that's very accurate. And I recently became a breathwork coach. I've been doing this now for a couple of years, and I asked this question to a teacher in, you know, let's see, what is it? Why do we have such resistance, you know, to breathwork, for example? And his answer, which I think is across the board, and to your point, is self-responsibility. Mm-hmm. It is, we don't want to take self-responsibility.
Bingo. Bingo.
And I think it's to your point about the social media. It's like somehow we've just lost ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I think what is really key that you're bringing forward, and it's a really important component of divine genius, element of divine genius being exchanged, and that is what I call co-creativity. My book is called basically Co-Creative Masculinity, one that's co-creative with the feminine. And what's not happening in your example is this co-creativity and this creativity. Yes. And production. rather than just consumption of images and arrangement around preferences. So I feel for you. And Regina talked to me just before I got on, and she said, Zeus, you're going to have to let them know that this is not going to be easy work, especially if you're at the forefront of this stuff. A lot of you are light workers. A lot of you are body workers, in the metaphysical and spiritual realms. And you are on the line of this. And you're looking around saying, hey, I want some fun too. I want some, I want some give back on this as well. And I think that's part of the reason why I wanted to engage you as colleagues, not just as me being an expert in this situation. I have some expertise and some dharma to share with you, but I see you more as colleagues in this way, in this forum. And it's not easy. A lot of people are absorbed right now. A lot of people have been taught or have allowed themselves to become addicted to kind of a self-absorption and preferences. Like, okay, I don't like this person or that community. And you even see dating sites where it's just swipe left and swipe right. It's like, what is that based on? I can tell you it's not based on divine genius. It's I can say with a fair degree of certainty it's not divine genius. But I think also that it will pass eventually. And it's already starting to create problems. People don't like, your soul does not like a shallow life, and that is ultimately going to be undoing of this kind of lifestyle. Now, here's another thing that's difficult, is you can't do that learning for somebody else. We're all taught. I can't do that learning for my son, my ex-wife, other people. We're all taught, if only, if only they would listen, or if only they would just allow a little bit of room for this to happen in their lives, or consideration of the notion that there could be angels or upper forces or a deeper aspect of themselves, then they might be able to listen to that still small voice and say, hey, and Regina calls it sparks of desire. I've always kind of wanted to help out on a high school play. Not to act in it or be anything, maybe to be, I think this is Regina's example, to be on set design or mentoring young people. And it's that part we're missing right now. I'm kind of curious, with your friends, is there anything that they really enjoy doing that they're passionate about?
She's very passionate about food.
Okay. Eating it or making it?
Eating it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I'm not. So I tried to, but I still try to listen. I still try to engage. And it's almost like a game. It's to the point where I wonder how far we can go in giving attention and giving. And this is just in general. It's just like. I wait for the reciprocation, and it does happen with some people, but I think you're really hitting on something. I think we've just become so detached.
Right.
There's just this, I'm looking for that genuineness, and it's really, it's interesting to me. I'm seeing the same patterns that you and Regina are seeing. I'll just say it that way.
Here's some hope. Here's a story of hope here. In this class that I have, one of the exercises I have is to investigate the relationship between thinking and feeling. Like, if you have a positive thought, does that eventuate in a positive feeling about a particular person? I said, and the same thing with a negative thought. And people find that they do. When they have a negative feeling about someone, that negative thoughts come up in their mind. And when they direct some kind of prejudicial behavior to that person, a negative or positive, alternately positive feeling or thought will come up. So they found that there logically is a big relationship between this. And we do exercises where we literally stop a negative feeling or a judgmental feeling, we put ourselves out on it, and then we try to flip the feeling. We try to reverse the feeling. But one of the most powerful parts of my class is after we've already established this, and I encourage you all to go onto my website, askdrzeus.com. I have a quick course there that's in the banner, and it has my 10 little experiments, emotional experiments. I'm going to go ahead and prescribe that for you, okay? You said, was it Rachel you said? What was your name again?
Yes, Rachel.
Rachel, I'm going to prescribe that for you, okay? See if you can get your friends to do one of those, okay?
Okay.
It really has to do about learning into your emotions. I almost treat it like a party game or something like that. Okay, one of them is really interesting. It doesn't necessarily involve them. It comes from psychological research, and you do something of a very pleasant, completely off the wall, surprising thing of a pleasant nature to them that they weren't expecting. You just do it randomly, right? And then you just see how they react. You know, so that's just one of the experiments I had there. There are several others. These things that I was talking about in terms of leading you through things, this is for everybody in the audience. Go to askdrzeus.com. On the banner up top, there's one called the Quick Course. And under that, I have 10 little experiments with a warm-up that can help you intriguingly engage another person in a positive way emotionally, or really tweak your own relationships. But one of the things that I see in Rachel's example is this, that a co-creative, divine genius-oriented, spiritual, real relationship requires creativity, requires positive, co-creative, or creative or productive capacity. And in this case, that spark of desire for this person that's liking to eat food, maybe you could challenge him to say, let's cook some food. Let's do some kind of productive activity that engages that passion. And I'm beginning to find this even with young kids addicted to video games. If they can be engaged with something that's creative or productive and be taken seriously and appreciated by someone else, then the dynamic begins to change. The relationship becomes more real. There's something about productive or creative activity that requires something of someone that allows, that kind of inherently disciplines the relationship. I mean, discipline in a positive sense. Instead of just wandering around, you know, texting on the phone, half listening to you, creates a focus. And if you can participate in that productive activity in a co-creative way, oftentimes that can create a new dynamic. And when my own students are doing this, one of the things I have to do is do a pet peeve, right? And do kind of, again, surprising or reversal on that, or change the game. And one of the examples I give on my site, and that my own students have tried, is like having their friends put away their cell phones. And actually, when they're going to dinner, talk. Just something that simple. And it's amazing what kind of responses I get on something that simple. They start learning things about each other, what they care about, what they're going through, because they've gone ahead and unplugged. Now, Regina is, a longer term plan for Regina, and I'm really supporting her in this, is to develop a series called Unplugging, where you learn how to unplug from the things that don't work in your life, the things that are distracting, and then passion, right? And passion has to do with creativity, has to do with sparks of desire, has to do with productivity, contribution. And a lot of times that gets sidelined into this notion of moral service to others, right? It's not this vibrant, strong, hey, we could do things together. Hey, I'm going to do this. You want to come along? And that can be very, very good at stimulating a healthier, more interesting relationship and getting out of the old patterns. I'll give you a quick example from my class, because it's one of the ones that created tears for me, and it created tears for my own students. And that was the one about this guy who was basically one of the country's best hockey players, or a really top flight hockey player, had gotten a full scholarship to Penn State. And just before he went, he and some of his hockey buddies got involved in a car accident. 2 of them died. He himself got injured, lost the scholarship. He was able to heal. He's still a good hockey player, but he decided from that point on he was never going to play hockey. He had a 14-year-old son who had begged him to play hockey. And I was leading him through these exercises in this course, where he was investigating where that feeling was coming from, how thinking and feeling were coming together, where he's learning to embrace some of those feelings and not be afraid of them, and therefore process some of that trauma. And I said, hey, the next week is, instead of just thinking and feeling affecting each other, we're going to change an action. Okay, because I kind of build people up to it. I said, go and play hockey. Do it. And he did this great post to me and to the class. He went ahead, and not only did he do that, but he did it in a surprising way. He kind of tricked his son, who had been begging him. His son's now 14, had never played hockey with him. He put all the equipment in a car, and his son is as a goalie. And his son was kind of suspicious because he was going to go on his dad supposedly for work. And he says, Dad, where's your trailer? Because he's working construction and so forth. And Dad says, oh, don't worry about it. They go to the ice rink. He starts to pull up his trunk, showing him, and he says, okay, he just kind of was flipping about it. He said, okay, let's see what kind of goalie you are. And his eyes went really super wide. And he said, are you kidding? He said, let's do it. And that just totally made that son's life, his day. Therein is a clue there about what it means to have real relationship and what can springboard real relationship. That healing and hurt and the ability to create deeper relationships with your own emotions and feelings gives you the spiritual confidence to be okay when someone else is not doing a great job of that, and help you facilitate that relationship with them, creating a more authentic relationship between the two of you. And that's how it starts. It's not easy. You are all on the forefront of this, especially if you're involved in light work, body work, and those sorts of things. Women are much further ahead than men are. I will just say it right off. You go to a yoga studio, 90% are women for the most part. You look at, people listening to Belinda or the ones listening to Regina on some of these areas, they are overwhelmingly women for the most part. But men, we're there. Men of good heart, we're willing to learn, we're willing to listen. And we're gonna be there with you in this. And we're not gonna be the greatest at it. We haven't been taught all the best habits, but we're picking up a few things. And that masculine energy, if it's co-creative, could be an extraordinarily powerful amplifier of female energy. So I do encourage you to, it's on my website under products. If you wanna pick up a copy of The Spiritually Confident Man, I talk a little bit about divine genius. I talk about the different evolution of man and coming to a more spiritually confident man. So that's something you can do. And again, you can always sign up too for a personal counseling session with me at askdrzeus.com as well. Or just send me a personal email with your question. I'm pretty open to that. I also do a 15-minute free consultation on that. So if you think one of your friends would benefit from it or you, there's no obligation. If you just wanted to have a couple questions, send them along. I'll share my wisdom with you. But the important thing is we're creating a community. And this community is built around the upper meeting the intersection of the upper and the lower. That's what it means to be human, the inner and the outer, the male and the female. And hopefully this happens in a co-creative way that allows this community to build. I'm very hopeful about that. I'm very hopeful about our ability to do that. As we start to lose, and here's another thing, this revolution is being led by introverts. I'm not an introvert, for the most part. There's parts of me, I'm an ambivert. Parts of me that really want to be alone, and restful, and apparently I had many past lives as a monk, so I'm very comfortable being alone. But, you can kind of get an idea that I can engage too. But for the most part, I'm finding that this revolution is going to be led by the still small voice. And guess what? Y'all introverts out there are really good at the still small voice thing, okay? And I'm gonna just try to invite you out and help add a few skills in as an extrovert about how that still small voice is very powerful and it can really embrace others. And it can really help that happen. Now, when it comes to the satisfaction and fulfillment of it going the other direction, which is in Rachel's case, the other person coming back, I'd say get outrageous, break unwritten rules, challenge someone to be creative, do something random, surprising, psychologically that works really, really well. Just insist on a person putting away their cell phone and having a conversation. Again, all these things have been proven to be quite successful in the class that I'm running, and it's well tested. I'm on the 7th semester now of having developed this class. I got a pretty good sample size going forward. And these things all work. Again, I encourage you to look at this and see if you can try a couple of them with your friends and get back with me. Let me have an email or something like that in terms of how it works. And I really appreciate the feedback on that. So I will do that. What were you going to say?
I will do that.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Does anyone else want to type a question, or has this brought up even an insight? It doesn't even have to be a question, just an insight. We can riff on your insight. We're dealing with introverts here, which is oftentimes, I just have to have the patience to say, okay. I was in Wisconsin. which is kind of Nordic and German and a little bit more stoic emotionally. I once waited 30 seconds to a minute for a whole class of about 30 students to come back on a question, and finally somebody broke. So I know that it can take time, and I know that it's an introvert's general processing to take time to reflect on something. So I welcome Regina is one of these people. And I think I might actually share a little bit about, in terms of our relationship dynamic, between what it's like between an extrovert and an introvert, if we have some time. But I want to get to your questions first. If you have even an insight or anything, I'm open at this point. Just go ahead and raise your question or jump on. We don't have, an overwhelming amount of people, so it should be fine.
Hi, this is Jude,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know quite how to say this, but there are times when when I simply do not understand. I cannot grasp what other people are saying to me, and it often leaves me almost wishing that I hadn't engaged. It's such an incredibly helpless feeling. And I find this a lot with young people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an older person, and but no, I find it with a lot of people. Yeah. So
Now, can you give a specific example about what just happened recently, when you're engaging them? Can you give us a little bit of the content of the conversation and maybe what was happening in your mind, like in which you were not connecting with them?
yeah. I can give you so many examples.
Okay.
I have a daughter who's 40 years old, and Melissa, we've had plenty of conversations in the course of her lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So often, I simply cannot fathom where she's coming from. It's just, I've raised you, I've known you for 40 years. I can't get my head around what you're saying or doing. And I don't know how to respond to her. Or I had a friend recently tell me, and I don't mean this in judgment against Christopher Hitchens,
Right.
but he was saying, but he admires his capacity. And I'm thinking, this man, he admires his ability to debate, to organize thought. And I'm flabbergasted that. And then it feels almost like judgment. But don't you see what he's done to himself in order to do what he's doing? It's like, I don't know. I don't relate well to other people. And I guess that's my experience of being an introvert. Maybe that's what I'm saying. And not for you to get in a conversation with me about that, but I imagine it's not an isolated experience.
Not at all. Not at all. And this, again, is why I'm saying the introverts are going to lead the revolution here, okay? It's going to be a quiet one because you're introverts. But here, look at your example, okay? Look at the example of Christopher Hitchens. Now, the rest of you might not know this. Christopher Hitchens is a well-known atheist. He was at one point supposedly a liberal. Then he turned into sort of a neoconservative. He supported the Iraq War. He seems to like to argue for the sake of argument. He likes to use his mind. And this is a problem with a lot of our world today. We're dominated by mind. And by mind, I mean the intellectual mind. And the intellectual mind is part of the lower mind. It's the positive aspect of the lower mind, okay? Many people confuse the intellect with some kind of higher capacity, right? But reasoning is not part of the higher mind. Or so the higher mind, intuition, is kind of the lower end of the higher mind. And inspiration is the way I look at it, is the positive pole of the higher mind, okay? That's the part that's kind of connected to your soul. That's the one you're piping in from here. The lower mind, the stuff coming up from below, impulse and instinct is the negative pole of that. And intellect is the positive pole of that. If you notice, intellect tends to put the kibosh on impulse, right? We're going to be civilized, right? We're going to make sure you don't take over impulse. You're not going to run all over the place. But that repressive capacity is not a higher capacity. It's not a creative capacity, right? So when you value the intellect over and above intuition and inspiration, which are aspects of the higher, you're going to get yourself into a corner. You're going to paint yourself into a corner. And what happens, I think, in your example, Jude, is that the world, especially through technology, has made a false dichotomy, okay? And it's a false dichotomy between two aspects of the lower mind, which is preventing people from seeing and experiencing and getting in touch with this more higher aspect of themselves, okay? So as young people are being beguiled by technology, that's a lot easier to do. When they get beguiled by false dichotomies, that becomes easier to do, okay? Okay, you're either a Democrat or Republican or somewhere in between. Or in my book, I said, you're either a social man that's like trying to please everybody and a wet noodle, or you're the toxic animal man that's trying to dominate everyone. And I try to disrupt that dichotomy and say, no, wait, there's a co-creative man, which is off that altogether. And what you see in your example is a lot of these young people have bought into a false dichotomy based in intellect and based in technology, whereby what they think of as progressive is what they call virtue signaling or political correctness, or arranging your life in images in ways that make it look like you're going to get into heaven or make it look like you're a good person. But that can't happen if the heart isn't engaged. And the nice thing about introverts is that you guys engage your heart. Not so, but it's a solvable problem. It's not a bad thing. It's that often you don't share that because you're so sensitive when you try to share it and you're not getting effective communication with someone, or you're not getting that sense of feeling connection between you and somebody else. You feel like one, you failed, or that this is hopeless, or you feel yourself being very vulnerable to that person. And those are all really legitimate concerns. I don't, as an introvert, you're not going to just jump in with old feet and hands to begin with. So this is where, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Well, what is the solution? I don't know what the word would be. Solution. What is the appropriate response when one can't relate?
Okay, well, here's what I would say. Next time this happens, say, first of all, declare yourself proudly as an introvert. Just let them know you're an introvert. Say, listen, I'm an introvert. I take time to process things. You're going so quickly and so fast, it's been difficult for me to hear it. Hear what's at the heart of your concern. And then begin to ask questions that bring it out. Say, first of all, would it be okay to slow down? And what are the care at the middle of this? What gets you excited? What gets you jazzed? I'm really curious about that. I really want to know about that. And I can tell you any introvert or extrovert out there would love to tell you what they're passionate about. And they may do it a little too quickly, but just take the time to actually communicate directly. And it may be somewhat assertive, but say, I need you to slow down here so I can take some time to process that and come up with a question. And to know a little bit about more where you're coming from, what this passion is, why it drives you, where it can go. And see if that works. One of the things that oftentimes happens with introverts, this is true for Gina, as it's true of many, is the whole idea of trying to give your energy over to someone completely. And then in the process of getting lost in that giving energy. In this case, you're not giving your energy completely over. You're actually standing nice and solid in the middle of your introversion. And you're using its strengths. And you're combining it with a non-characteristic assertion, not telling somebody what to do, but just explaining who you are and being okay with the fact that you need more time to reflect. But if you do it in the context of really wanting to know what's going on in their mind, what they're passionate about, they will have the patience to be with you. They will have the patience. If they don't, if they're like, come on, like get up with it. If they're going to be that rude or that dominated by this millisecond editing culture that we have, then it probably isn't going to be that helpful. Then you're just going to have to say at that point, well, I'd really like to know what's going on. If you have some time where you're a little bit more peaceful and you're not, looking at your phone and whatever, I'd really like to hear about it. And that's at that point all you could do. But I'd be curious again. You try that. Try what I just said, and give me a message back, Jude, and let me know if just being assertive in that kind of nice, gentle but direct way that allows that person to know where you're coming from as an introvert. You need more time to do this, allowing them to slow down a little bit more, getting at their passions. It's going to be good for them as well. And let me know if it works.
Okay, Joe. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Do you have any more other questions out there?
Well, I could say one thing.
Okay.
I find the opposite, that I find that people don't understand me particularly. Like I'm not a total introvert, I'm going to say.
Okay.
But I have to think about things before I really give an answer sometimes. But if I'm just being spontaneous and talking to people, I find that they don't get me. Like they just totally don't get what I'm saying. And I mean, and then I'll just say, okay, I'm fine with that. But it just sort of, I don't understand why they don't totally understand what I'm trying to say. And it could be the most subtle thing.
Okay.
Could just be like making a joke about something, you know, just at the store or something like that. And then the other side of it with relationships is I find that I am sort of the introvert in my family relationship, as I have like 4 kids right now. He's got a big karate thing going on in our basement right now. So that's why it was so noisy when I came on.
Okay.
But, you know, it's like everyone turns to me for the answers. It drives me completely nuts because they're all like turning, like, what do I do now? What do I do now? I don't really want to be the answer person anymore. So.
Okay. The first thing I would say is, do they recognize wisdom in you? Is that why they're turning for the answers? Or
I'm sure. I'm sure that's what it is.
Okay. Oh, so you have something there that they recognize as of value.
Right. They're just afraid, you know, they don't want to make a decision. On my husband's part, I'm going to say that it's because he doesn't want to be wrong.
Okay.
Necessarily.
All right.
And my kids are older now, so they're not all living here or anything, but.
Right.
So.
Right. So can you bring up a recent example about where something like this happened that was not satisfying to you, where they didn't understand you or they didn't really respect you? Does anything come to mind?
It wasn't respect. It's not about respect. Like today I went to this is a really dumb example, but I went to the gym. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I was just talking. I can't even remember what I was really talking about, but and of course I'm like older than most of the people at this gym. So maybe there's part of that, but they kind of looked at me like quizzically, like, what was she even talking about? And I can't explain really what it was, but I just knew that they just didn't totally get me. So I just said, all right, I'll see you tomorrow. I left. But just in terms of like stuff in my house, like how do I fix the dryer? It's crazy stuff. Like, how do I change the battery on something? It's like, how did I get myself in this position? That's what I want to know.
Okay. So. Well, I mean, a lot of times, and I'm just going to use my relationship with Regina a little bit here, because introverts tend to process things internally, the ways in which you come to your conclusions is not apparent to other people. Okay. And here's another thing I notice also. I'm not the best at picking up with subtle cues. So like if you're using body language or something to try to communicate, or you're using really kind of moderate words to communicate what's going on with you, oftentimes it'll go, it'll fly by. So do you, in these cases, when you're trying to communicate to someone and it's not, and I'm going back because there's kind of a little bit of contradiction here. It seems like on one hand, they go to you for wisdom or advice. On the other hand, they don't seem to really kind of understand the kind of wisdom that you're bringing forward. Is that correct?
No, I guess what I was confused. I'm confusing how I'm saying it. What I'm saying is when I'm out in the world,
right,
I have a home office.
Okay.
So let's start with that. So, you know, I'm on the internet all the time as my job, but I have a home office. So when I go out in the world, I feel like the people out in the world don't totally understand me. Like they don't really get where I'm coming from.
Okay.
In my home, I'm very wordy in my home. I mean, I'm very communicative, like,
Okay.
go do that, because they won't do anything otherwise if I don't say it.
Okay.
So, I mean, maybe I'm being silly about it, but the thing is that I just find that there's a big dichotomy really between the outside world and my inside world here in my house, where everyone is they can't move without me. They're not going to do anything unless I explain it to them.
Okay.
And I don't know how I got there, but somehow 35 years later, this is where I am. So,
well, here's what jumps up for me is in terms of an insight. I've worked with so-called learning disabled students, and here's what I found. I found that they are not learning disabled. Most of them are what I would call hyper processors. They actually process at a very high rate of speed. And if anything, they tend to be more intelligent than average. But oftentimes they're being put into these courses or classes, or I'm tutoring them because they're failing at school. And the notion is that because they're failing or you're not connecting, that there's something wrong here. What I've found in these instances is that the way that they have of thinking is either very quick or very different. And for that, sometimes, maybe this will work with you. Again, it's a nice little experiment. I almost everything I do is experiments, right? Custom designed experiments for you to get feedback. And then we just work on it, okay? But what I've done with them is to say, okay, I go shoulder to shoulder. If we're working a math problem, we're working a math problem. In your case, it could be just something that you guys do together. You're cooking together, right? Or some activity that you're doing.
We work together. We work together. We're in the video business. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, good. Let's say it's an actual project that you're doing it, and that this person has certain gifts and good things there, and you have your gifts and good things there. By communicating across, saying, okay, how did you come to this? What were your insights? How are you composing this? Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that about you. And then invite them if they're not as communicative or as solicitous to you, invite them explicitly. Say, now you do that to me. What is it about what I'm doing that that's not quite working for you?
Yeah.
And because it's much more concrete and applied to an actual activity, it will be easier for that person to understand and explain. If we're just talking about like very airy metaphysical things, it'd be more hard for that to happen. But it's something that's more clearly geared in towards something practical. You use that as a medium to get at the substance, which is how that person comes at the world. And you will begin to learn the language like you would another language, like French or Italian, by beginning to understand that. And actually, introverts are better at this. They're not good at the engagement part, and they say, hey, wait a minute, stop, tell me what just went on there. They're trying to do it all inside and all themselves, that you all have to learn that one. Okay. But
right.
Processing and being able to understand a different mindset and being reflective about it, usually you're better at that. And us extroverts aren't as good at that. So let's go ahead and trade our strengths on this one. You stretch yourself a little bit more and be a little bit more assertive, but at the same time, much generous, and set it up so that you're learning from them and their insights, and you're insisting or at least giving them an opportunity to learn from yours, so you can begin to learn each other's language. But do it over something you're shared. You're doing shoulder to shoulder, whether it's cooking, whether it's video. And that way, that there's something about psychologically, there's something about shoulder to shoulder shared activity that diverts attention away from the self-consciousness that can sometimes happen when you're just trying to talk over a subject, person to person. Sometimes doing this versus this is a better way to do it.
You're breaking up a little bit, but I get what you're saying with the hand gestures.
But I think you're sort of supporting that notion. I was just about to say evolutionary biology seems to support this too. Is everybody got me on
I can't hear.
Yeah, your phone, your audio connection. Is that me or is that you?
I can't hear you back now.
Okay, right. Sweet. Okay, let me go ahead and see. Okay, let's go ahead and pause it for just a second. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording for a second here until I got this. Here. Okay, we're back. We had a technical snafu, and right before we did that, it was Holly, right? That you were about to say something about this versus this, right? About working side by side with someone versus going out with someone?
I was just saying I was getting what you were saying by your hand gestures.
Okay.
But, yeah. But thank you for everything.
Yeah. Okay. And I will repeat that again, just because it might have gotten cut off in the recording. And that's simply this. Ollie was talking about, as an introvert, sort of trying to be able to get herself understood, as well as some other people in the group saying another person. And that a lot of times, the way the introverts and extroverts can get together is actually be working over some third thing side by side and explicitly asking, what's going on in your mind? How do you see this? Why are you engaged in it? What are the skills? What are your mindset or things you're bringing to that? And then move the conversation to the other person where they can learn about their way of looking at it, their skills, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that, and I was about to talk about a little bit about evolutionary biology in this. For some reason, research shows that if you say something to another person on the side of another person, especially a child, they give a lot more credence to that than if you speak directly to them. Literally, the processing in their brain gives a lot more validity to that. I think a similar process is actually working here. We work side by side with someone, focusing on a third thing and learning about each other's orientation with that third thing. I think there are a couple of reasons for it. One of them is it depersonalizes a little, it decenters it. There's a lot of interpersonal emotional risk when you're confronting someone directly, right? Wait a minute, I don't get you. What are you saying? What is that sending? And a part of their mind, they're thinking, oh, I'm stupid, I'm not articulate, Whereas when you are working on something together, that's not the issue. You're both contributing, you both have your own relationship with it. This side part is being mediated through that shared activity. This is why co-creativity is nice. And this is why the notion of divine genius is nice, because your difference is actually positive in this situation. When you're working together, are you hearing me again, or is it going down again? Okay. Okay. All right, I'm going to pause.
It might be when you move back. It might be if you just keep in one place.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Yeah. Okay.
Although I'm looking right at you when I'm saying this. But
okay, well, that's good. And when it comes to these things, we can look right at each other.
Okay.
So I think that can be part of it right there, which is when maybe it is just that it's not picking it up. When you're going side by side with somebody, and I noticed this when I was a wilderness ranger, because I was really good at educating people about not camping too close to riparian zones, which are the areas, the very fragile areas around lakes and streams. But instead of confronting them and being like an enforcement officer, I literally would go side by side with them. I would literally be using my hand, and they'd be shoulder to shoulder with me right here. Okay. And I would say, well, look at this environment. Look at how, and I would even go down to the edge of the riparian zone, and I would press on the grass. And I say, see how delicate that is, right? And I would help involve them in a side-by-side way in developing this connection with their environment. So it wasn't me enforcing and telling them what to do and rebuking them for being ignorant about this. But we were in a collaborative and cooperative process of engaging and connecting together. And this is how real relationship begins to work. There's two things you need to know about learning, any kind of learning. The first is threat shuts down learning. It literally shuts down the parts of your brain involved in learning, and joy opens it up. If you know nothing about learning or learning research, those are the only two things you need to do to know. So when I am going side by side with someone, especially if I'm enthusiastic and I'm positive and I'm really getting people to be sensitive about their environment, it's opening up the joy, lowering down the threat. Okay. So, and once you're comfortable with each other enough, you could probably do more face-to-face stuff. But now you've got a pattern of lowered threat and increased joy and passion and openness of heart to each other's way of doing things. It's an important aspect here. We haven't got to this point in our class this semester, but I have one on prejudice. And at the root of prejudice is a feeling of threat at somebody else's difference. The only way to subvert or transform that is to see someone else's difference as a source of joy. And divine genius is that source of joy. I love that you're different than I am. Why? Because I'm not trying to be a boss. I'm not trying to control my world. I'm trying to create a relationship with you that could be really interesting, in which I could learn things, in which we could work side by side and make something happen. So these are actual skills too. You know, they do bespeak of a certain kind of ethical orientation, but that's more of a end product. It isn't what drives it. What drives it is this delight in someone. It's the delight in the activity and the connection to the world, to that person, to the desire to be surprised, wanting to be surprised in a pleasant way, wanting to know something, wanting to have your own prejudices or your own assumptions disrupted, and enjoying that. We've been taught the opposite. Reinforce assumptions, reinforce control. Any disruption of that is some kind of threat. This is backwards. From a spiritual standpoint, enterprising and curious standpoint, what I emphasize in my classes, curiosity is the main emotion I want you to have with regard to your so-called negative emotions. What is it telling you? Hold it close. Let's speak. Be delighted in what you hear. Don't be intimidated. Don't try to tell it what to do. Don't try to repress it. Don't say, oh, I'm awful for thinking this. Say, why am I thinking this? Where's it coming from? I had an example in Columbus, where I had people of different colored skin going by, and I had literally a racist impulse flare up in me. Now, you have to understand, I've done anti-racist work and anti-sexist work, and my book is extraordinarily feminist, so you're going to get a lot of dose of that. And I am not in the least threatened, but it still was buried in my aura, or was still buried in my body, okay? And it came up, but I didn't treat it like some kind of black mark. I saw it as an entry into insight. And what I noticed is that some of that thinking, that racist thinking, had been encoded into my body in my upbringing. And for some reason, because I was at home, after being around the world and living around the country, that part that was still encoded in my body came up. And I was to embrace the grace and goodness of this, rather than try to create an image for myself. I was thankful for that reminder, right? That no one is perfect, that I'm not perfect. Doesn't matter how much I advocate or much I become an Ask Dr. Zeus specialist on relationships, that I always have something to learn from this deeper wisdom, including the lowest parts of myself as well as the highest, and from you. That's why, seriously, your wisdom. If we can stimulate wisdom and appreciate it in each other, then we are well on our way to going to where we need to go. And that's the part that inspires me and gives me my own passion and my own divine genius with regard to this kind of work. So I want to go ahead and wrap this up, because we are at about an hour and 20. We had a little bit of a snafu there, and I wanted to keep it at a reasonable time. But I again, allow yourselves as introverts, extroverts, all to reflect on this, and to send me questions at Zeus at askdrzeus.com. Please stop by my website. I have a free PDF book that you can have for signing up to the site. And I'm going to be engaging now in a blog where I'm going to, if you have a specific question and you want to have an answer to it, I'm beginning to cultivate these in my class, and I'm going to do a regular blog where we address these kind of relationship-oriented and emotional questions. So I'm ramping that up, and I'd love to get your questions. Love you to stop by and take a look around, and let me know what's going on. And we can, again, as colleagues, as friends, as a community of people that of heart can get this thing going. So with that, I want to say thank you so much. I appreciate your help in bringing this forward. This is my first time. I want to thank Belinda. She's the one that put this on her list and really made this possible, even when I was a little nervous to do this for the first time. I want to thank all the introverts of the world out there for continuing to be patient and to hold the space for this. And of course, my wife, Regina. And I really feel positive for this. So again, thank you, namaste, and I look forward to continued contact in connection with you all. We'll see you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zeus.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. This was great. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.